Who can tell me what dissent means? Opposing ideas. If you were having a meeting and someone was talking up front and I said I dissent, what would I mean? I don't really agree. What about a stupa? Who can tell me what a stupa is? Okay, it's a religious shrine. What religion are we talking about?
Buddhism.
Okay, good. All right, who can read me setting the scene? Why don't you read it, Maddie? Nice and loud, please.
The king's good is not that which pleases him, but that which pleases his subjects, insisted the author of an ancient Indian handbook for rulers. According to Hindu teachings, a ruler's duties included maintaining peace and order by enforcing laws, resisting invaders, and encouraging economic growth. Achieving those goals was difficult. Northern India was often a battleground where rival rajas fought for control of the rich Ganges Valley. Then in 321 BC, a young adventurer, Chandragupta Maurya, I don't know,
Good. You were doing good.
forged the first great Indian empire.
We read that already, didn't we?
Yeah.
Didn't we read this? And we went over this section. We talked about the kingdoms, and I asked you to pay attention to, yeah, I think we went over this pretty well already. You should be ready to take the quiz. What did these people, now we're talking, mostly one of the things that was fascinating in here was the Gupta dynasty in their golden age. Who can tell me one of the achievements of this dynasty that was impressive? Just one. Who can tell me one? Yes.
They had improved farming and trading.
Okay, they had improved farming and trading. What else? There's some fascinating things that they did. What else did they do?
Trading.
Okay.
The decimal
Pardon?
system.
All right, they started the decimal system. What did they add to mathematics that was very helpful? Raise your hand and tell me. What did they add to mathematics that was very helpful?
Numbers.
Okay, they did add the numbers that we use, but there was a concept that was particularly
Zero.
the concept of zero. They made a symbol for zero, and they used the numbers like we do today, and they used the decimal system. Now, they had some real advances medically, too. Who can tell me one of them? Yes.
They vaccinated smallpox.
Yes, they had figured out a way to vaccinate people against smallpox 1,000 years before Europe did. What else did they do that really fascinated me? This one, I was really surprised. They were able to do basic plastic surgeries, reconstructive surgeries. So to have a smallpox vaccination and to have a kind of being able to repair facial injuries and do a form of plastic surgery, to use herbs and other remedies for medication. In architecture, they built their beautiful stone temples and stupas. They had carvings and art that they still found remnants of today that are just beautiful. Also, they had a monastery university that they had started. That is really impressive. So we see the golden age of this dynasty. Now, there's a part in here that tells that there was a visitor to the dynasty that was from China, and he was a Chinese historian, a Buddhist monk who wrote things down. What did he say about this amazing culture? What did he say? His name was Faxian. Who can tell me what he said?
Glory.
They didn't need officers or restrictions.
Okay, he said they didn't use officers or restrictions. How did they punish in this culture? Did they use
Fines.
corporal punishment?
No.
Did you guys read this? Okay, are you ready for the quiz? Good thing we can go over this, but did they use corporal punishment?
No.
Okay. They didn't have a lot of taxes. They were punished by fines, and his evaluation was this: the people are very well off without poll or tax or official restrictions. Only those who till the royal lands return part of the tax. And reports that these people were happy and doing well. Their crops, they had large crops of wheat and sugarcane and rice, and they had an economy where they made cotton cloth and pottery and metalware for local markets, and also did a lot of trading, as was already mentioned. This was an amazing dynasty. They had some cave temples in western India where they painted murals, and parts of that have survived that are quite beautiful. And in literature, they were advanced too. What was something that they wrote in literature? A famous play. Right, the Shakuntala was written, and it tells you what that was about. So they had advances in all areas, and they existed and reached their height about what period, what was happening in Europe when this Gupta dynasty was at its most magnificent, with its art and its beautiful building and its neat cities and its educated people and its beautiful cotton cloth and its markets and its trade industry. It was just beautiful. What was happening in Europe at the time? The Roman Empire was just crumbling. So the Roman Empire had been magnificent too, but when India was blossoming here, the Roman Empire was falling. How many remember the dates for the Roman Empire? I didn't teach you this necessarily, but I've mentioned it before. 500, I'm rounding it off, 500 years before the cross, 500 years after. The actual dates are 509, when they kicked the Etruscans out of Rome, and 476, when the barbarians invaded. So about 500 years on either side. So now we're in AD, 500 years into AD, and this civilization in India is just glorious. And that's the one that we read about today. Now I'm going to give you a quiz on that, and your next section is going to be to read, let's see, today you have a quiz on 1 and 2. Do you remember section 1? And then you're going to read 3 and 4. So I'll tell you what, we're going to do the quiz, and then I'll talk to you about 3 and 4 a little bit. 1 told us the division between Hinduism and Buddhism. Which is the oldest? Hinduism. Hinduism is the oldest. Which one do we know the founder of?
Buddhism.
Buddhism. Who was the founder?
Buddha.
The Buddha, his real name was Siddhartha Gautama. He was a prince, and he was married and had a nice life, but he decided to go on what the Australians would call a walkabout. What happened to him on that walkabout?
He spent 40 days in the
Okay.
Actually thinking about
Yes.
what life, or like
an evil spirits.
Okay, good. It was
Yeah.
like a meditation thing. He sat under the Bodhi tree. He spent all those days thinking, and he was asking himself, what is this all about? How many have asked that question about life already? Why am I here? What is the deal? Why do we even exist? I mean, I've done that. And he did that, and he spent time in deep, deep contemplation. What's one of the things that we learned that he came up with?
That there's always going to be hard things.
Right, and that's part of a thing called what? The four what? The Four Noble Truths, that's exactly right. All of life is full of pain and suffering. The cause of suffering is desire, and the cure is to get rid of desire. That makes sense to me. But then he says, well, how do you do that? Well, you follow the Eightfold Path. And his Eightfold Path, it's really simplified here. They just give you the main points. But if you ever want to just know a little bit more about it, I think it's such an interesting philosophy. You can look it up online. Basically, it's right, views, aspirations, speech, conduct, livelihood. It's a life of honor, really. And in some way, he says this will help you overcome desire. But to understand that connection, you would have to read more about it. But we do know that he came up, under the Bodhi tree, he came up with the Four Noble Truths. And that was very interesting, I thought. He never returned to his palace. I think that's a little sad because he had children. He had a wife and children there. He never returned. He must have died on his journey. Now, what did you find that was alike about Hinduism and Buddhism? Share with me what you found that was the same.
They both believe in non-violence.
They both believe in nonviolence.
They both believe in like reincarnation.
Reincarnation, good. Anything else?
Did they both believe in like karma?
No.
different words, but yes, they both did. They both believed in reincarnation, where at the end you'd go into this perfect, blissful place. One was called moksha and one was called nirvana. Who called it moksha? The Hindus or the Buddhists?
Hindus.
Hinduism. And nirvana was the term that the Buddhists used. What's something you found different about Buddhism from the rest of Hinduism?
Buddhism didn't have priests.
Buddhism didn't have priests. What did you find different about Hinduism from Buddhism? Who can remember one thing they found that was unique to Hinduism?
They had the caste system, unlike
The caste system. Oh my goodness. That was a bad thing. That was definitely a bad thing. Because I say it was a bad thing, I think the people liked it. They all knew where they belonged. At least the people at the top liked it. But the people at the bottom didn't have a good life. And the thing I don't like about the caste system that is so different than the American culture. In the American culture, the big dream is that you can always move ahead if you work hard, right? That's the American dream. Well, they didn't have a chance. It didn't matter what they did. They were going to stay at the bottom. In the end, Buddhism was divided into two sects, two distinct groups. One was Mahayana and one was Theravada. One of them was people liked it because there was a way to get to an afterlife. It was a more mild version of Buddhism, and it sounds like a mild word, Mahayana. Mahayana. But when I say Theravada, that's the more harsh version of Buddhism. Theravada's Buddhism closely followed the original teachings of Buddhism, but Mahayana was easier for ordinary people to follow. Even though the Buddha had forbidden followers to worship him, Mahayana Buddhists did that. They bought pictures of him and worshipped him. And if you want to do a fun bulletin board, I don't know who's coming up, but a really fun bulletin board is to show pictures of all the different Buddhas. You know, there's the happy Buddha that's fat, and then there's just different Buddhas, different images of Buddha. It's very, very interesting. Okay, we're going to do our quiz on these two sects. In this hierarchy, who do you think is the most important people in society? That's harder to do in America.
President.
the ruler.
Well, the president, but the general population, who would be the highest class?
Like,
The rich.
The wealthy, yeah. And so it kind of goes by money here. But listen to this. Now, to get away with this, you had to teach the people that what caste they were born into was determined by their previous life because they believed in reincarnation. So they had very strict caste system with a lot of limitations. And the highest class was the Brahmins, and they were considered the purest and the closest to moksha, the ones who were just about ready to, transcend life and not go through the cycle of rebirth anymore. And it went all the way down to the untouchables, and they were considered so impure that they could not even associate with any other caste. They had to shake these wooden clappers that would make a noise to warn people that they were coming because they were so impure. They are only allowed to do jobs like handling garbage or dead bodies or finishing leather, which is a kind of gross process. I think they used to use urine to do that. And, in fact, dealing with sewage or digging, those were the only jobs they were allowed to do because the caste systems determined everything. They determined where you lived, what you ate, what you wore, how you earned your living. So if you were born into a very poor family here in the United States, and you were told you may never rise above this, you're here because you deserve it, you must have been a real creep in your last life. How would you feel about that? How would you like to, if you were considered so impure just because you were born to these parents, that you had to warn people you were coming, like a leper has to do in some societies?
Oh,
How
that
would
would
you
drive
feel?
me crazy.
That would not be fun, would it? It would be hard. And so, but people, even though they couldn't change their caste, they were taught if they did the best they could in whatever position they were born in, they'd have a chance to move up the scale in a later life. So this was an amazing system. Now, is the caste system legal in India today? Does anyone know? It is not, but it still exists. It still exists. You can make a law but it takes a long time to change people's beliefs and the way they operate. So there are still people, I can show you a modern day article from Time Magazine that's in my file about the untouchables today. And they're picking through garbage to find food in this picture. So it is still observed. And when my daughter went to India, she was very affected by that because she saw people sitting on the side of a sidewalk begging, and here comes some high-class person, and someone was in front of him clearing the way, and he just kicks this person, just kicks him real hard to get him out of the way. And that upset her, that this crippled person was just being kicked so cruelly to get off the sidewalk. Today, even still, Blakely worked in an orphanage while she was in India, and the little guy that was attached to her, this one little boy just loved her, and he would sit on her hip almost all day. He'd kind of wrap his legs around here and she'd hold him, and he couldn't see, so he was always feeling her face, or when she talked he wanted to feel her mouth. And he had been blinded by whoever had him, whether it was his parents or someone who'd kidnapped him. They poured acid on his eyes so he could beg. And so his eyes were closed and damaged for the rest of his life. And she saw people like that on the streets, people who'd been made blind on purpose so that they could beg, or had bones broken. So it's getting better, but this is slow to change. We're talking about centuries of the caste system. That's a hard thing for me to get my mind around. But I suppose if I lived in that system and I was born as a Brahmin into that caste, do you think I'd like the system okay? How would you feel? You really believe that you were this caste because you've been so wonderful in all your past lives. Do you think you might feel a little arrogant about that? Maybe just a tad? Like, I would feel like wherever I went, people should be kissing my feet, you know, bowing before me, clearing the way. And I would think I was so special.
Yeah.
So it might not be so bad for that group, even though that's such a false sense of arrogance in my way of thinking. But it wasn't nice for the lower groups. And the middle groups, they were, you know, some of them were okay. They just wanted to work hard and move up the ladder. Now, family life was interesting in India in this period because it was what your book calls joint family, in which parents and children and grandchildren and uncles and everybody often share a common dwelling. And I think that's kind of wonderful because in America we do something really sad. We take our old people and we tuck them away in little homes and houses. Sometimes a family will take a grandma and grandpa into their home, but if they become too hard to care for, they put them in a nursing home or a place for them to live. Yes?
China is kind of still like that, but it's not really that wonderful.
Uh-huh.
Maybe it's because of the culture difference, but when old people are around the house, if they're nice, but most of the time there's so much drama because the value difference.
Because of the what difference?
The value, the way they view life.
Mhm.
And old people back in China, when they, at their time, it's just everything just cheap. They're so cheap about it, especially my grandma. They're just so cheap about everything. There's so much drama when I'm around her. And she's like, when I like to eat meat, I'm a meat eater,
Uh-huh.
and she is so cheap on it. She bought me those meats that are fat, but it's cheaper.
Uh-huh.
And when she chops them, it's like teeny tiny ones. I can't even pick up with my chopsticks.
She's really tight-fisted, isn't she?
Yes.
Okay, now this is interesting because traditionally in China, old people have been greatly respected. Now sometimes that can cause them to act a little arrogant too when they get older. They expect to be waited on and they expect everybody to do things their way. But I prefer it to what we do to our elderly. Now I'm getting old, I'm 66 now, and I'm starting to find a few gray hairs here and there. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to be old, you know, it's a better alternative than being dead. But I notice elderly people, and I'll watch people like your age walk by an old person, and they look right through them like they don't exist. They don't acknowledge their existence, but yet as they go further on, they might see someone younger, and they might say, hi, you know, like that. And I think, this is really sad, because even though people are old, they still have a brain, they still have feelings, And in our
Yeah,
culture,
my whole childhood, I've actually always been extra careful to acknowledge older people's existence. I've done things for them or offered to help them or everything, or at least said hi to them.
that's
I
really,
don't know if other people do that, but I've never done it.
that's
Still don't.
really good. I have a son who's always loved elderly people since he was little too. But in general, our society has sort of tossed the elderly aside, and I'll tell you why. What is the biggest value in our culture? It's productivity. It's being effective, it's being successful, it's, you know, you have to be kind of earning your keep on the planet. And old people are retired. They're not contributing to society anymore according to the younger people. But older people can contribute in a lot of ways. And the reason I like this Indian lifestyle is because the older people are around the babies. You know, an older woman can help hold the baby or feed it while the mother's busy doing something else. All ages learn to understand each other and relate together. That part of it really appeals to me. I do not like the way we tuck our old people away. My husband is a psychologist, and one of his jobs is he's got a few homes that he visits with the elderly. And he comes home and tells me stories that just make me weep. There is a woman in one of his homes. She's got a doctorate degree. She's written books. She's still really sharp, and no one comes to see her. She's so happy when my husband comes like every 2 weeks. It's like the highlight of her life, and I think, why are we throwing these people away? And he'll look on the records. They have family or whatever, and people just put them away, and a lot of people will forget about them. Now, some don't, of course. There are people who are very attentive to their parents as well. But I think the general attitude towards the elderly in our country is lacking. And if you can think of it, when you see an older person and you just acknowledge their existence by saying hello, you make their day, because they're not used to being treated that way so much anymore. Yeah.
I feel like the best way is just you live apart, but the two houses are like in the same block or something.
Yeah, live apart but close, so you can help take care of them. I can see why you feel that way with your grandma. So
That's nice, Shauna.
it is hard sometimes taking people into your home, but in this society, they've all grown up together, so it's not such a trauma to the family style. Now, in early Aryan society, when the Aryans first came down and took over India, remember the Dravidians were there, and they were called Sudras because now they were lower class, and the Aryans were the upper class. Actually, women had pretty high status in that culture. And then later on, when the Gupta dynasty with all its achievements and its beauty existed, high-class women had some rights as well, and they could be educated. But by the late Gupta time, women had gone down in value as well. So women weren't considered as valuable, and this happened in cultures all over the world. Now, why do you think so many cultures have made women a lower class of society? What do you think that's based on? Okay, let's say you have two bullies, okay? Both of them want to be the most important person and they want to rule. Okay, one of them is skinny and weighs 90 pounds and the other one is a brute and weighs 200 pounds. Who do you think is going to end up ruling?
The brute.
Yeah, I think part of it is that men are physically stronger than women, and that gave them the ability to suppress. That's a guess. Please don't put that on your test. Why do you think it's been that way? What's your idea about why have women been considered lower? Yes.
Because of physical needs. They, like when they go over pregnancy, they're so weak and they have to be taken care of or something.
Okay, they might see them as physically weak. Yes.
Men are worried about or maybe fear that women are smarter or stronger than they are.
Well, that's
I'm not saying they are, but I'm saying they might think that women are, and so they want to oppress them and make women think that they aren't.
You might have hit on something here. Let's look at what it says in this section. Women were taught to have Shakti, a creative energy that men lacked. Okay, they were thought, to have it. So they thought women had this creative energy. Now, women are intuitive and tend to be creative and nurturing, and men saw that they had something that they lacked. And that would make the husband complete. Still, Shakti might also be a destructive force, and it was the husband's job to control that. Now, in that, I see a little fear in that one. They would say, you have this thing I don't understand. My husband's been a counselor and a psychologist for decades, and he'll say to me, I can understand male clients quickly, but women are so much harder to understand. He said, it's not because I'm a man. He says, my female counterparts say the same thing, even though they have an advantage, but women tend to be more complex. I find with my children, when something's wrong with one of my sons, it's quick and easy for me to figure out what he needs, but not with my daughter. And so they saw this difference in women, and I think they kind of feared it because it was their job to keep it under control. Now here's one that really kills me. A woman's primary duty was to show devotion to her husband and raise the children. And then, if she did, she would be reborn into a higher status. This is the one that kills me. As custom changed, a high caste widow was forbidden to remarry. Often, a widow was expected to join her dead husband on his funeral pyre. In this way, many women became a sati, or virtuous woman, and of course they probably thought they'd be born even higher status if they did that. Some widows accepted this painful death as a noble duty to their husbands, and however, some bitterly resisted it. But imagine a woman crawling onto the funeral pyre and burning to death with her husband because she is a devoted wife. That was her duty. So this is how far they would carry it. Now you don't want to mix up these two words. Shakti is the kind of mystical power of women, and sati is burning on the funeral pyre. You know, I think we just about covered it, so we'll have a little bit on 4 and a quiz tomorrow.